Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are back with the bird's eye view, and today I happen to see an article, but today I wanted to talk about the U.S. Army and tanks and tank namings, and then we'll be joined by PFCme to talk about his experience. So here we go. So there was some articles, and I kind of brought this one up because this shows like some of the names. This one's aggravated assault, abandon all hope, um American badass, daddy's belt, diplomacy failed, ground zero, Casey Anthony, hold my beer. And so I think all of these are crew named tanks. There's Baby Yoda, and so that's kind of what I remember seeing, but I actually didn't know or didn't think about when I had my military experience or any time after what the process was for naming these tanks. And so this other article talks about MLRS and Alpha Battery could be named Alexander the Great or Ass Blaster. Bravo Battery gets along lines of Betty White or Boomstick, so they have to use the first letter in what battery they're in. And Charlie would be Come Get Some or Cat Scratch Fever and stuff.
Or
So
Commodore.
what was that?
Or Commodore.
Or Commodore, right? Okay. So so then this other article, it talks about in reality, the process of naming tanks, artillery guns, and rocket launchers system isn't as grandiose as people are arguing it out to be. When this says when it's time for the crew to take command of a new vehicle, they get to give it a name. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. With some exceptions, you name it entirely for the purpose of easily identifying it when you're walking through the motor pool, reading the name stencils on the gun or rocket pod is going to be easier than reading the serial number. And that makes sense. So it says that the name usually, from the crew is something personal to them, either invokes strength, humor, holds sentimental value to one member. And then apparently the command has to approve the name to make sure it's not too far out there. And then that's what brought me to this article. And it says dissent in an army ranks after ban on rank and file tradition, a dumb rule. So basically what this rule was is if you didn't qualify as the top tier gunnery, then you no longer got to name your tank. And basically what they were kind of saying here is that that only officers will only ensure that only officers get to name their tank. A field grade armor officer told military.com, noting that officers are typically assigned to tanks with the best gunners. All right, Bradley.
Yep.
Sorry about that. All right, PFC. So you were stationed where?
I was stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas.
Fort Bliss, Texas. Did you do this process of naming your tanks?
Actually, I believe our name was grandfathered in from our old.
So the tank already had a name when you got to it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Commodore.
So you didn't necessarily go through this process and you're not sure what it was. Do you remember anybody else naming their tanks when you were in?
Other than personal nicknames for like the hassles that they gave us, no.
All right. So when did you serve? If you don't mind me asking.
I served I joined in 2008, and I served in active duty for 4 years, and then I did 3 years reserves as a truck driver.
Okay.
88 Mike.
So this isn't necessarily an army-wide policy of naming tanks. It's kind of down to the unit is kind of what I'm gathering.
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. And so were officers generally given the best gunners in the group?
No.
So how did your unit go about assigning the gunners?
We went through and all of us qualified. My tank being the fastest got top tank. But we got top tank, which means we got given our boots. Our commander paid for our boots.
Your what do you mean paid for your boots?
So if you ever seen a tanker boots, it's got straps. It doesn't have laces. So if you ever see combat boots with straps, those are tanker boots.
No, I don't know. Now that I think about it, I can't. I was around some armor units training, but I never actually paid attention to their boots being different. I did not know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Even Cav Scouts have different boots, and also their Stensons and stuff like that.
So they actually bought you brand new boots.
Yes.
That's actually pretty cool. So,
Yeah.
so okay, did you do tankers have to spit shine their boots?
No.
That's just a light infantry thing.
At least not my era. Prior to me, like when it was with the blacks, with the black boots, yes, they did need to be it, and that's my grandfather who was a Marine tanker. He said he always had to spit shine his boots.
Interesting. So then, since you didn't go through this process, what was your tank's grandfathered rule? I mean, grandfathered name?
Commodore.
Commodore. And were you in Charlie Company?
Yes.
Okay, so that at least holds there that way.
Yeah, it's Comanche Company, but yeah.
All right. So what's your thoughts on this particular unit not allowing the crews unless they get top scores to name their own tank?
I think that tankers should, the commander, the TC of the vehicle should name their tank, whether it's informal or formal, because it is a tradition. But that falls on their leadership to say to approve it, I guess.
So you've heard of other people naming their tank. This talks about it being kind of superstitious not to have a tank name.
Yeah. It's kind of like having an empty flask under the driver's seat.
Empty flask on the so are tankers like super superstitious then? Because I've never heard any of these things.
We're no more superstitious than the infantry or fisters, but we have our own little unique traditions.
Well, as a fister myself, I don't remember doing anything superstitious in the military.
Yeah, it's like carrying, like when you deploy and you have a half a $20 bill.
No, the only thing for me was anytime I was going out the field, I was bringing my own toilet paper, but that had nothing to do with superstition.
Oh, we did too. We carried our own.
Well, like I said, that had nothing to do with superstition. So some people were saying here that it's gonna force these guys to try to get better so they can name their tank. But then the opposite side is it was gonna kind of alienate the junior crews and maybe actually affect their camaraderie and their morale because now they don't get to partake in that. Where do you fall on that?
Me, as I personally was a driver and a loader, and so my load, so it just depends on what the unit needed.
Yeah, but I mean, do you fall on the side because this spokesperson for the Third Armor Corps, which is where this is happening, it said they defend the statement, saying that the policy was a way of honoring tradition while demanding high performance standards. Do you think that's true, or do you think that it's going to affect morale and camaraderie in the lower ranks?
I think the lower ranks will do exactly as they're told, or otherwise they're going to have a hard time. So,
Now come
That's
on.
my
Now
opinion
come
on it.
on, Bradley, PFCme. You know just as well as I do that when command makes rules like this, it pisses off the lower ranks, and they do shit to purposely piss off their lower commanders, not in a way so much to get in trouble, but just a way to make it a little bit harder.
Well, sometimes it the kind of rebellion that we did if we didn't like something is we would intentionally hit a mud puddle or something along those lines if we didn't like a particular leader.
Right?
Or
You'd jump in the
yeah.
mud puddle and splash it on him and get his tank all dirty.
Well, no, it'd be our tank that would be getting dirty. But if we got the opportunity to sling some mud at our TC with his head sticking out if we didn't like him, then yeah, that's always a possibility.
All right, so for me is when I hear something like this, I was like, you really create that divide that furthers separation from the higher ranked individuals and the lower ranks, and it further divides instead of makes it cohesion. Because one of the things that I know in my experience when I was in the military is when you have this, when I was, before I got my sergeant stripes and I was a private or specialist or whatever, and you have, somebody sitting there with his, belly and his coffee mug and his cigarette, and he's directing all the privates to like get in the mud and dig a hole or do something, and you're like, okay. So, gee, one more shovel, you just in the back of your head, you're thinking, gee, one more shovel, this would go a hell of a lot faster. And they're just sitting there shooting the shit. That just divided that us there, right? And so when that sergeant wanted something, whatever, like we just drag our feet. I mean, we would get it done, but it wouldn't be to the best of our ability, and it certainly wouldn't be in the time frame they wanted it in. And then sometimes, when you were bringing them coffee, you might sprinkle a little extra dirt in there, and there's things like that.
Well, my tank was 3-2, which is the
Call sign.
Platoon sergeants. Yeah. And so we are kind of held at a higher standard, so we didn't really get to play around a lot on that side of things. Don't get it wrong. If we didn't agree with something, we voiced our opinion. Times in the front lean rest position because it was well worth it.
So as a tanker, what were the kind of like? Because I cannot imagine being confined to. You had what, 4 people per tank?
Yep.
Okay. I can't imagine having 4 people in the confined spots all the time that there wasn't little pranks and stuff all the time.
Oh, there definitely was.
Okay, so what kind of pranks?
The MRE and the MRE prank, which was always fun, like getting CS'd. That may have happened to me once or twice.
You may have to explain that, because I don't think if somebody's not in the military, they're not going to understand. Because even if you had an MRE and you have not experienced this, you won't know what he's talking about.
Do with the Tabasco sauce and the heater, really.
The heater that comes into the
yeah, and you just kind of add Tabasco sauce, and it makes a nice little stinging sensation.
And then when you pop the bag and the bag opens up, it is something else.
Yeah, sometimes I get my revenge just by eating beans.
Or oh man, you know what one always the barbecue pork MRE. Did you guys still have that when you were in?
Yeah.
Oh my god, dude, that one. I don't know what it was, but that one would put a hurting on your sleeping bag. So.
Oh yes, and the poor porter John that had to hold that mess.
So when you guys were sleeping, did you sleep outside of the tank, inside the tank? How'd that work? Because as light infantry, we
Uh,
had like little not well, we had a pad, a sleeping bag, and we were outside. So
it depends. If we were doing a tape, yeah, me as a driver, when I was a driver, that driver's seat was my bedroom for the duration of the table 12 or the table 14. Uh, for clarity for our qualifications when we're stateside. However, while we were doing combat operation training, we all got housed in tents.
hmm. So you'd actually get out of the tank and go sleep in
Yeah.
tents.
Yeah.
So the table, when you talk about table, that is a set of things you have to do to qualify for that particular thing, right?
The table 12 is an individual tank, and the table 14 is a group qualifying. So you'd have one full squad of 4 tanks, all 4 tanks firing at the same time. That's the 14. And then the single qualification, which is table.
Okay. So in your experience, how did you guys build camaraderie in your tank? How did you guys figure out how to get along and be the best?
Oh, it took some minor adjusting, but just generally getting all the jokesters together with the meanest NCO, and it worked out just fine.
So you had the meanest NCO and the rest of the
We
three
had,
you were
we
the
had,
jokesters?
yeah, I'm definitely a jokester, and so was the gunner, and so was the loader. Uh, Our TC was really, he was a good man. Like, he was a good NCO, but he was strict.
So in other words, you did
But
lots of push-ups. Is that what I'm hearing?
oh yeah, I got good at doing push-ups.
Yeah, I happen to say I did my fair share. So what's
Yeah.
funny is I was a 13 Fox Forward Observer artillery, and I was around the batteries sometimes. I remember them having names, but I actually didn't know um, that they were named like the crews or somebody named them. I just thought it was just I don't know what I thought. I just thought it was the name it always had, so that was just it. I never even actually paid attention to it because it just wasn't in my wheelhouse, right? That's and then as a fister, like we generally didn't have anything because I was light infantry, and then when I got my Humvee, it wasn't like we named our Humvee or anything. It was just
Oh yeah, we didn't
the
name
Humvee.
our Humvees either.
So and we only had one, so it was so it wasn't like we
We
named it.
deployed with IMRAPs and Humvees to Iraq, which is the greatest insult to those tanks.
Why is that?
Take the tankers out. There's a tankers. If anybody who's 19 kilo knows, death before dismount is
Oh.
our one of our mottos. And yeah,
Right. So you had to get out. That's what you're
oh
saying.
yeah, yeah. But, though it's also understandable to control one squad of tanks to pay for it. It's over, I think it's like $4.5 billion for one squad or something like that, with ammo, crew, and everything like that to include training. It's a very expensive thing. So deploying as filling in the ranks for infantry, yeah. But I'd say that my squad, Truck Comanche Company 4-6, uh, we were the best tanker. We were the most tight knit group, and the company wide. There was only 130 of us when we deployed to Iraq, and we were the most active out of that whole deployment. We were most doing the most training of the guys over there, and also doing the most operations.
So when you deployed, did they actually pack up your individual tank and ship it?
No, we deployed to they already have vehicles in Kuwait already, Fob Virginia or Cos Virginia. I don't know what they call it now. But back when I made it to Kuwait, it was Cos uh, uh, Virginia, and that's where we got our vehicles that were already
Right.
over there.
So they issued you a vehicle when you got there, and then how? I
And it
mean,
wasn't
because
a tank, unfortunately.
it what?
It was not a tank. It was Humvees and MRAPs.
Oh, so you didn't. You
We,
went
didn't
over as a
deploy.
tanker, but then you didn't actually have your tank when you got over there.
Yeah.
Jeez. All
Yeah.
right. So
Urban warfare
if you
kind of makes
were
sense.
to have been issued a tank, like if they were going to
Yeah.
send you over there as a tank, do they ship your tank or do they give you one that's already there?
Well, it depends. If the resources is there, then we're taken from there.
So if you
The
were to
chance-
show up somewhere and they give you a tank, how long does it take you to familiarize yourself with that? And you know, like, because I'm sure each have their own little things about them that make them just slightly different.
A good tanker can do it in less than 5 minutes.
Oh, so you already know the little tricks and
Yeah.
okay.
A good tanker also knows how to break his tank, and that's also how we adjust them too. So let's
All right. So any last words about your thoughts about not letting Krow name their tank and taking that away from them, kind of?
I think that it's a dishonoring of the lower enlisted to take away that right, but I think it's going to happen whether the higher ups want it to or not. So tankers, we are very stubborn in nature.
So whether it gets named or not, it's still going to have a name. Is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
It just might not
The
be
lower
painted on the
enlisted
barrel.
will- yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate you joining me, Bradley. It was good insight because, like I said, I was never a tanker, and this kind of struck me because I know, like, when I read it, it kind of made me a little like upset about it, and I was like, that's just not right, you know, because. But when I read it, you know, they were talking about it had been a tradition in that unit for so long, and then all of a sudden now they're like changing it and taking that right away.
Yeah. I will say that is true. Traditions of a tanker is really hard to break because we are stubborn, but I think ultimately it will get fixed or put back to the way it was if enough of them say, no, listen, we're not going to do our job unless you let us do this.
Or do it anyway.
And that's always a possibility, yeah.
All right, but with that, we're out of today. Thank you so much for joining us on the Bird's Eye View. Bradley, appreciate you being here. Leave a comment. What do you guys think about the Army, this field unit? So what is this? It's the 3rd Armor out of Texas. I think is right? The 3rd... Yeah, the 3rd Armor Corps out of Fort Hood, Texas is taking the rights of naming their tank away. So what are your thoughts? Go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and we're out of here. Much love all.
Later, flock. Oh, thanks for letting me...